Hi everyone, I'm Don from Tales from the North Overland, and today I wanted to talk about trip planning. If you've got a trip coming up, a vacation, a overlanding adventure you're going to go on, or something along those lines, and you want to help ensure that you're covering all the bases, making sure everything is a success, and making sure that the people involved are happy and all your goals are getting met. This is the method I use for doing such a trip and planning such a trip, and I am hoping that it'll be helpful for you. So stay tuned if you'd like and see if there's something you can pick up.
As always, hit the like button and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it.
The first thing I kind of want to talk about is how do we plan a trip, or what do we do? How do we decide on where we're going to go? We've got ultimately, for most of us, a couple of weeks of vacation a year that we can devote to doing a really interesting trip like this. Most of us are not full time overlanders or storytellers to where this is our main job. So when we get a couple of weeks off and we're able to orchestrate that with the whole family and other people that we are going with, we want to make the most of the time off that we have. So one of the things I do is I start in my to-do list. I personally use Things 3. It's a Apple store product, but you could use Microsoft like To Do. You could use any list on your phone or whatever. You could use a memo pad in your back pocket. It doesn't matter. But if you're like me, you watch a lot of different YouTube channels, a lot of travel channels, and you say ooh and you say ah at a lot of the trips that you see, and you're like, I want to go there, I want to experience that, I want to see it. You're inspired by these awesome YouTubers making these awesome videos, and you want to go there. So what I do is when I'm watching some of these, I've got my phone nearby, usually, like we all do. I actually keep a thing in my phone, a to-do list, and it's just a checklist, but you can do it any way you want. And I've got spots and trip ideas that I might want to look at. Some of them I've already done on here. Some of them I still want to do or go back and do more of, like the Wyoming backcountry discovery route. We just did this trail. We did a portion of segment 7, and I would love to go back and do more of that. It would be phenomenal. In the meantime, I've seen videos on the Idaho and Colorado versions of these, and I've got a few others listed here as well that would be really, really neat. So keep a list. Keep a list of what inspires you or what you want to go see or what you want to go explore. It may be destinations like these. It may be trails like some of these. It might even be a specific city or a specific thing that you want to go check out. But keep a list of where you want to go and explore. Occasionally, you're going to have to take what was on your list and somehow transpose it to something that can be geographically represented. I really like Gaia GPS for this. It is a great tool. I know there's others out there. There's Onyx, there's All Trails, there's a couple of others. In my opinion, Gaia has got great versatility. It's got great utility around waypoints and trails and routes, things like that. All of the different markers you can use and stuff. So at some point, I take a lot of the ideas on my to-do list that I've done, and I start dumping them over into Gaia. And it doesn't have to be super involved at first. It just could end up looking like a bunch of these waypoint markers all over the place. The reality is, once again, that typically we have a couple of weeks of vacation or a certain amount of time, and we have a ability to get to a destination, but not necessarily like the entire continental US or all the way up through Canada and to Alaska without some more extended time. So we end up with some time constraints, and because of that, because we don't teleport yet, we end up with some geography constraints. So Gaia is a great way to look at where all of your waypoints, all of your spots are. And you can begin to say, okay, I'm going to go over to, For instance, Badlands in South Dakota. And I had a bunch of things on my list for there. I wanted to see the Badlands. I wanted to see the town of Deadwood. I wanted to see Devil's Tower. While I was researching, I found out this whole Wyoming backcountry discovery route exists, and it is really, really cool. And I can look over there and I can say, I can make it there. I can do this in a 2 week trip. It's a heck of a drive from Michigan, where I live, but it's doable. While I was doing this, I had a couple of ideas in North Dakota as well. My idea originally was to drive up through Michigan, up through the UP, over through Wisconsin and Minnesota, into North Dakota, explore some stuff, go down into South Dakota, and head back. That was my original idea for the trip. After researching a lot of North Dakota things, I didn't see anything in there that really tugged at my heartstrings and said, I absolutely have to go. The Theodore Roosevelt National Park was close. It was the highest on the list, but it didn't make sense to go do that when on my vacation time that I had, 2 weeks, I could go to all this stuff in the Badlands and South Dakota and Devil's Tower and all this, and then actually go out here to the Wyoming backcountry discovery route, and then just kind of make the long drive back to Michigan when we were done. So all the extra time of swooping all the way up here just to come down here and come back didn't really make sense with the lack of attractions that appealed to me in North Dakota. So now that I've got a list and I've got a geographical representation of what's going on, I can start to actually coalesce a trip plan or an idea or an itinerary of places to go and see where I can maximize my vacation time, I can maximize my travel expenses and stuff like that, and fill out a vacation time pretty well. The next tool that I use is Google Sheets, and you can use whatever you want. I happen to use this one, and I'm going to make this template available, so check the information below and I'll have a clean template for this if you want to decide to try to use it this way. And the template that I use here has got a lot of my planning ideas in it, and I've got my objectives written down with some needs and constraints. I got my itinerary, cost, to-do list, group gear, my gear. Everyone else has their own page that's going on this trip with their own gear lists. I've got an inventory list for tools and a inventory list for my camera stuff, and I've got some post-trip tasks. And we can add or remove tabs to this depending on the nature of the trip. So if we're doing a kayaking trip, obviously I would add a kayaking list to this, and I would end up making sure that I had the gear and the training and everything else to support that. I know this is going to come across really academic and really nerdy. I apologize. I'm an engineer in my real world life, and sometimes a process or a flowchart like this really works. It works for me. It may not work for you. That's okay. Stay tuned. See if there's anything you can pick up. So I use this flowchart as an idea of how to make my trip. First off, I define my trip objectives and constraints. I want to know everything that I hope to get done during this trip, and I want to know the constraints that I have during this trip, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then I determine functional areas that I need to support. So for instance, logistics. This is, do I have the permits I need? Do I have a fishing license if I'm going to Wyoming and going fishing? Or is there a gold panning rules and regulations I need to follow up if I'm going into the mountains and panning for gold? Stuff like that. Vehicle considerations. This is, what do I need to do to my truck? What equipment do I need for my truck? What supplies do I need to make sure that it continues to run during the entire trip? We all have navigation concerns. When we go on a trip, we have to be able to navigate where we're going, where we've been to. We might want to be able to record things and be able to offer them to our Patreons, which I don't have yet because we're just starting out. But we may have a lot of navigation options. We need to know where we're going ultimately. And so you can see I use Gaia for that. I also use TomTom Go for street navigation because it uploads traffic really, really well. Communications, protection, photography, camp and shelter, kitchen, day hiking, your personal and your hygiene items and anything else. Like if we were doing kayaking, we would make sure we would put kayaking. We make our lists, our items, our gear, and everything else we need. We also want to consider training for this. Do I need to understand or know how to use any of this gear? So if you've got a winch on your vehicle because you decided I'm going to need some recovery options, you should know how to work that winch. You should know winching um, requirements, winching practices, and other stuff, along with the gear necessary to use it. Another great one is like in first aid kit. It's great to have a first aid kit. It's awesome if you got a first aid kit that an EMT would be jealous of. But if you don't know what all those little white pouches and things in the first aid kit do, it doesn't do you a lot of good. So when you are buying your stuff to support your trip, make sure that you are learning about the stuff so that it actually supports your trip and is not just present on your trip. From there, we just kind of do a final assessment and make sure everything is squared away. And then we go on our adventure. And finally, when we get done with our adventure, we want to do a little bit of a reassessment and say what worked, what didn't work, what do I want to improve, what was just right, what gear worked perfect for us. And from there, we can go back and on our next trip, we can continue to support these functional areas with improved stuff or, yes, continue doing it that way. So going back to the Google Sheet where I've got everything stored away, you can share Google Sheets, which is why I do it this way, and share it with all the members that are going to be on your trip because they're all stakeholders in this. They all want a great trip as well. So make sure that they're in on the planning, they're in on their concerns. Make sure the group is taking into account any constraints that they have and stuff like that. When I do trip planning like this, it is not uncommon for me to have my computer open. I've got 3 screens total. It is very common for me to have Gaia open on one screen, this open on another screen, and then like a web page that I'm exploring or something like that on a third screen. I'll also use iOverlander a little bit to find stopping points or layover points or things like that. So it is not uncommon to hop all over the place while you are planning this because once you make one revelation in an area, you may have to bounce around to support that or to make sure you've got the gear for it and the like. So the first tab I have here is objective and needs and constraints. This is going to sound really academic, but it really is important, okay? So we have user needs or just needs for the people that are going on the trip with you. So for our recent trip, I wanted to see the Badlands. That was a need. I wanted to see Deadwood, Devil's Tower, Bighorn Mountains, and I wanted to do the Wyoming backcountry discovery route. So I had these on here. And I also wanted to do segment 6. Those were also in our area. I didn't put it on here because it wasn't a need. It was a nice to have, but it was in my Gaia map and stuff like that. So these are needs, what we absolutely must get done during this vacation. And other people in the group can add needs. For instance, I went on a trip with my family last year to the Upper Peninsula. They had never been. That's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And my sister informed me that her and her daughters are very big breakfast fans. They needed breakfast, so that became a need. Okay, I put that on here. It wasn't on this particular UP trip, or I'm sorry, this Wyoming trip, but I'm putting it on here as an example. So making sure that we took the time out for breakfast was a big need. Okay. If you are going to be making videos and narrating and making a YouTube video or taking lots of pictures for an album, photography takes time. Getting the drone together and getting it up into the air and making cinematic quality segments, it takes a decent amount of time. Waiting for just the right light or setting up your camera or lugging a tripod with you, it's going to take time and effort to get all this. So if you are doing a YouTube channel or if you have a strong need to have documentation of what you have done, artistic or whatever, this becomes a need and it becomes a constraint because it's going to take time. You may have people in your group that are bored while you are waiting for the perfect shot. That's a constraint. They're going to have to understand that, hey, Don's got to get the drone out and take all this stuff. We want the cool video afterwards, so we're just going to have to suck it up and wait for it. If someone in your group is impatient and they're like, no, I want to go, I want to go, I just want this to be a high energy, awesome trip, this might not be the right trip for them, or you might have to scale back your expectations on this. But this is where conflict out on the trail starts to be diminished because we understand what the group's needs are. We understand what their desires are. We understand what their constraints are. Some other things we had is we have an off-grid trailer. It's a off-grid trailers expedition 2.0. And with our typical electricity use, we get about 4 days out of it before we're at roughly 60%. So we could do 5 days, probably get down to 50%. I like to keep it around 60% so the batteries don't become damaged in some way. So I had a constraint of we can really go 4 days, 5 days pushing it before we need a recharge. It's got a 31-gallon water tank. With our typical water use, we get about 3 days out of it. When we push it, we can get 4, but we have a constraint in that we have roughly 3 days before we have to find water to refill it. We have another constraint that my Jeep and the trailer get about a 200-mile range on a tank of gas, and I have a 5-gallon tank in reserve, but that is reserve. So I want to keep in mind this range while we're driving. We also had a constraint to minimize hotel costs. We wanted to eliminate them actually on this trip if we could. We've got this cool trailer that we can sleep in. It's got a rooftop tent. It's expensive. I didn't buy all of that just so I could go sleep in hotel rooms every night as well. So minimizing the hotel was just something that was going to help us with the costs of this trip. I know costs and stuff like that is not usually addressed in a lot of YouTube overlanding videos, but it does matter. Budget for travel is actually very important. It is a significant amount of money to drive a overland intent vehicle somewhere because they don't get the greatest of mileage. Most of the storytellers and the YouTubers you see, it's part of the cost of doing business. They're probably writing it off if they've got an LLC, and they are making sure that they're recouping as much of that as possible. But if you're just going on vacation with your family or something like that, you're going to have to consider all of the costs involved. So once you get your needs and constraints down, make sure you keep up on that. You might be bouncing around as people bring stuff up. Hey, are we going to be near so and so? I would like to go and do. And then you're going to add that. You're going to see if it can be added. The great thing about doing this and keeping up on this is you start seeing if you've got mission creep, which is your initial ideas are now transforming into something you didn't really plan on. So if you go back to the topo maps here and people start saying, what about going down to Colorado and doing this? What about going to Moab and doing this? Or I just saw this really cool video in Eastern Oregon. I want to go do this. Is that doable? Can you keep going and do this in the time frame that you have? And the answer may be yes. The answer may be no. The answer may be I got to ditch a bunch of stuff so that we can do that because that's an even cooler idea. But that's okay. You can be flexible and you can do all this. So once something's on this sheet, it's not set in stone. It's just a spreadsheet. But when everybody on your trip, because you shared this with them, starts getting visibility as to what's happening in all this, there's no disappointment. There's no, missing expectations. Someone doesn't say, well, I really wanted to see Badlands and we blew right past it to go to some other place that I didn't want to see. So it matters. It really does. So if you take anything away from my video, maybe it's this. I know it's academic. I know it's a little bit heady. This is what's going to make sure that people are not disappointed in stuff on their trip. It's going to keep satisfaction high. So now we get to the itinerary tab, and this tab is where we're going to set up the trip. And we have a certain amount of days available to us. That's put up across here, what the days are. and we start to populate with what we can do during that time. So in my case, I was going from my hometown to Waterloo, Iowa. That was about 10 hours or so of driving. That's what we could get in that time. The next day, we were going to go to Waterloo to Badlands. We have our camping set up here. We were just using iOverlander for some boondocking spots along the way. Monday and Tuesday, we were going to explore the Badlands. We were going to camp in areas around there. I had figured out where to do that from a couple of state maps and more iOverland stuff. And we were going to explore this area really well. After that, we were going to head up to Wind Cave, Cascade Falls, Jewel Cave. We ended up not doing any of these because the requirements to get in were basically to wait in line at about 6 in the morning and hope that you were able to get a tour reservation at some point during the day. So we opted to not do that. We ended up going into Deadwood. We ended up making reservations for an RV park there. And that allowed us to get the water and the electricity that we needed, which was in our objectives over here, our 4-day and our 3-day thing. So we were pushing that quite a bit here. We did end up finding a place to resupply water in this area here. Again, not everything goes to plan, but we were able to do that. We didn't stick to this 100%. Again, this is not set in stone. We were a little bit adaptable. The next day, we were going to go to Elk Trail and hike that, then go to Devil's Tower, check that out. Then we were going to hit the Wyoming Backcountry Discovery Route, camp there overnight, and then we had another resupply for water and electricity. And then Sunday and Monday was the long drive home. This was the plan we had, so that we had kind of planned all this out. So the other thing along here I did with itinerary is breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. This is where we planned out what we were going to do. Most overlanding videos you see, they're making some, high-end gourmet meal at a campsite, and that is really cool, and we did it as well. But the unspoken truth is getting to all of these places is lunch in a sack from McDonald's or something like that on the road. So what I planned out here is where we would be eating on the road, what we would be eating if we were stopping and making food and stuff like that. So we kind of got our meal plan panned out. Since we were going to be in Deadwood these days, we wanted to try a couple of the cool restaurants there, so we knew we were splurging a little bit by eating in these places. But for a lot of it, we tried to keep our costs down by bringing the food we already packed or stopping and getting resupply. You can see grocery here and grocery here. We had to resupply a couple times, and that's normal. Here we basically did laundry, and if you look on the map, we had that actually planned out. You can see the dirty sock there. So I had identified a couple of spots where we were going to lay over and actually do laundry. We're not big breakfast eaters. We knew that we were just going to be doing breakfast bars, if anything. And we knew dinner, we would be doing steaks, smash burgers, kielbasa, etc., nacho spread. That was really good. You can see that in our video. It was all really cool. So I kind of color coded some stuff here. The camp areas that we were going to say that where we just didn't need reservations, I had in this yellowish color. If I needed to reserve something and I just hadn't gotten to it yet, I put it in orange, and then in green, something that we had to reserve, that we did reserve. So nothing should be in orange on here. Found out couldn't really make reservations here, so didn't really try. I just left it orange as a kind of a placeholder, so I knew that. We ended up not using this particular facility because we were able to find water elsewhere, and like I said, we didn't need to recharge. So that's kind of how we did everything with the itinerary. Again, this bounces back to objectives. We knew what our constraints were for water and electricity. That showed up here in like these durations right here and like these durations here. So that shows up there. We wanted to minimize hotel, so that shows up here where we're boondocking, camping with Overlander sites and things like that, or just rest areas where we're going to sleep in the Jeep or sleep in the trailer type thing. So that's how some of these needs and constraints get implemented in your plan. Some of the other objectives, obviously, is see all these sites that we wanted to see and do. Those are where the itinerary gets populated. And doing that, you go back to your map, you kind of see where things are in relation to each other so that you can make a reasonably good route and a kind of an effective route to get through all of this as well. So that was my way of doing incorporating all of like the needs and constraints into the itinerary. All right, now we're on costs, and I'm on a different page here because I filled this page out a little bit better than the South Dakota and Wyoming trip that I was on. So this is kind of where the costs come into play and how I track them and who could expect what. So we had all of the events we were going to. So I kind of researched and figured out what the costs were. I wasn't 100% correct on all of these, but that's okay. So, like the cost for a campground spot at Leelanau State Park, and this one was $28. Lake Superior Campground was $20. We bought a VRBO in Munising that was close to $1,000, but there were 10 of us, so it was split up reasonably well, and it was pretty cool. There were some cool things to do there. We went to a mine tour, so this ended up being, somewhat expensive for all of us to get in and check it out. But that's okay. Most people obviously paid for themselves to go through this, but having a list of all your costs and everything else is really important. It helps the group to see what's going on. Down here on this particular trip, I had mapped out everything as far as the miles that we were going to go. And you can get that from the itinerary, figure out your starting point, your ending point, and determine the miles just with like a Google map and stuff. I estimated on this trip 16 and a half miles a gallon. Uh, I estimated high gas was going to be 5.25 a gallon. It was cheaper in the lower peninsula and around this in the upper peninsula, so I actually wasn't too far off. So each day we had the cost for one Jeep, and then we multiplied that by two because we had two Jeeps between the two of us. So total for that trip, we were going to spend this much in gas. And it came out to be actually pretty close to that. So over here, we did the actual expenses and everything afterwards to check things out and see how close we were. And we were actually pretty close to that. So having a page with your costs, in my mind, is really, really important for group cohesion. It shows who's paying what. It shows how things are being done. All that is out in the open, so there's no concerns or no resentment or anything like that around the money around the trip, because it does take money to go do all this stuff. So this is the to-do list tab. It's blank because I mostly do my to-dos in Things, which is just an app for a Mac. So I kind of keep track of everything there. If you're going with a group of people, more than just your family unit, it's a really good idea to keep track of the to-do list in a public way. So if it's one guy's job to go and get, ORV stickers for his vehicle, that should go on here so everyone else sees that it's being handled. If it's another person's job to finalize the meals and things like that, that should really be on here as well. So again, people can see that things are getting handled. People can step in if things are not getting handled or if there's questions or anything else. So, all right, so now we are in the gear list for the group. These are group items that everyone or a majority of the people in the group are going to be using. I've got them categorized by logistics, vehicle support, trailer support, because we have a trailer, power, navigation, comms, camping, kitchen, food and drink and ingredients, and other. And I'm kind of going to go through these a little bit. It's a little bit lengthy, but you can do that. The other thing is I've got it I kind of got this partitioned here. This is just for us. If there's other families going, I would probably duplicate this whole area underneath here so it's all on a page, but you can do it any way you want. You could do, group list and then your family name and then group list some other family name and so on and so forth. So logistics, these are the things we need for this particular trip. I had driver's license, vehicle registration, proof of insurance, medical and dental cards. Leave your spare keys with another driver, ideally another driver that's in a different vehicle, so you don't both accidentally lock your keys in your car. If you're going to be doing a lot of off-roading or you're going to be doing fishing or anything like that, it's a good idea to start putting in like your ORV stickers if you need them or your fishing licenses if you need them. If you've got campground reservations, print those out. Make sure that you've got like a notebook somewhere in there that that you can put all this stuff in. So this is more or less all of the logistics and documentation that you might need for your trip. For this one, we have vehicle support. For road trips, the vehicle is very, very important to keep running. Otherwise, you're not on a road trip, you're on a road stop. So I had a bunch of this stuff. And I did get all this. I just didn't change it to green yet, but it's a good example. Have some extra oil, extra washer fluid, a spare belt for the vehicle, spare tire, some tow straps, D-shackles, spare coolant, a trash bucket, spare can of gas, fire extinguisher, and then I had a toolkit here. But there's so much in this toolkit, I just output it to its own page. Again, we've got an off-grid trailer, so we had a lot of things we needed for support of the trailer. Chocks and boots so it doesn't roll away or get stolen. AC cord to shore. The max coupler hitch and all the pins and retention pins and everything else we need for that. It's also not a bad idea to have spares for those. The keys to the trailer, the spare keys with my wife. A hose to refill our water tank. A garbage bag, but like clothespins, voltage gauge stickers to show, where the batteries actually are. Just a little sticker I made with the voltage level and the percent of charge. And then we have a shower enclosure. This was the little floor, so while we're taking our showers, we're not just standing in mud. There's something under our feet. Power support. Really modern people doing modern trips. We've got a lot of electronics to support. We've obviously got phones, iPads, drones if you're going to use one of those, GoPro camera, stuff like that. So this was everything that we needed for power. And again, this is group stuff. Each individual may have their own power needs and stuff. But we have a battery system in the trailer with batteries and an inverter. I've got a little portable Anchor battery pack, which is really, really nice. Got a whole bunch of cables. Just to make sure all of our equipment is getting supported. And then we've got the solar panel and the controller and the adapter to be able to plug into the trailer to recharge it. For navigation, I use TomTom Go for street stuff because, again, we've got miles and miles and miles to go on road. Again, you've seen using Gaia GPS here quite a bit, not only for these big routes, but especially for these smaller routes. And trails and things like that. So in Badlands, we had a number of places we could camp identified. Here's Wall, South Dakota. We had a number of, like I said, places we could camp where there's dispersed camping along the way. I had a couple of favorites picked out. So I had a lot of this planned out. You can see how I've color coded it and stuff like that. So Gaia is really, really good for stuff like that. For comms, I took 2 Bofang radios. Just because if we're in a place where there's no cellular coverage and someone wants to go off for a day hike, there's still a way to report back to the trailer and whoever is behind and stuff. For camping, this is what we have when we're actually setting up camp for the evening, which includes basically just sitting around the campfire as well as sleeping. Or a lot of our camping needs are met simply by having the trailer that we have. So we have a place to sleep. We got the rooftop tent. We have an awning, camp chairs, and a little folding table just for utility. With the amount of water that was available to us on this trip in different spots. I determined we didn't really need a water filter. So kitchen, the trailer also fulfilled many of our needs. Stove, sink, water, and fridge and freezer was all done with that. And then the rest of it was really just kind of kitchen and cleanup stuff. That was all part of our inventory. Food and drink, you could actually list all that out here, just like inventory, if you wanted to. My wife handled this part. She opted to do it on a list that she had, so it really wasn't part of this list. I just filled out some of the basics that I wanted to make sure that we had on the trip, and she made sure that was handled. But for the most part, she kind of did that on her own. If you're going to be doing this with a group of people, it is best to do this here so everyone can see that their needs and wants are getting met. We had a first aid kit, laundry soap and softener, stuff to make campfires, stuff to do goal panning, things like that. So that's kind of how we handled group lists. So now we're doing personal lists. This is my personal gear list. As you can see down here, I really recommend making a page for each person. So there's a little bit of accountability, a little bit of reminders and stuff like that for each person in the list. So for logistics, again, driver's license, insurance registration, CPL, uh, um, my medical stuff, and a bunch of credit cards and stuff like that. There's also like, make sure that you've got some cash and stuff in here, things like that. These are kind of all of the logistics. I do carry protection items when going camping, as everyone should. For actual camp itself, yeah, I have a sleeping bag or some bedding and a sleeping mat. The rooftop tent mattress is nice. It's just not quite thick enough for me. I'm a side sleeper, so I need just a little bit of extra padding. So I made sure I brought like one of my old thermarests that I used when backpacking. Basically, kitchen and all that other stuff is a group item, but I made sure I brought a water bottle. I did bring a hiking, just a day pack, because we did plan on going to that Elk Mountain hike. We weren't ultimately able to do it, but still brought the day pack hiking to support that. Personal hygiene, it's kind of the same for everybody. Razor cream, washcloth, deodorant, nail clippers, Q-tips, TP, meds, whatever else you need. Chapstick is a big one. This is all pretty standard fare. Clothing is really important, and that kind of actually goes all the way back to objectives. Needs and constraints can be seasonal. So if this was a winter camping trip for some reason, or as an example, we would have very different needs and constraints here. We would be making sure we're putting in weather considerations. We're more or less in the middle of summer, so didn't need a lot of them. Uh, Basically, I had planned this out from freezing to 95 degrees and had stuff planned accordingly for all of that. So I had a wide brim hat just for sun protection, sunglasses, rainwear, belt. Work gloves is really, really important. Make this like one of your essentials that you take with you. If you spend most of your time, like I do, in a cube or behind a desk pushing a mouse around, it's a very different skill set and range of motion when you finally go out and do camping and hiking and stuff like that. And you don't have the same levels of familiarity as you do with stuff at home. And that means you're going to get, your hands are probably going to get scuffed. They're going to get dinged up a little bit. Let the gloves take that. Don't, there's no reason messing stuff up on your hands for stuff like that. Safety glasses are the same way. Just make that part of your overlanding or your trip kits. It's a really good idea. Obviously, underwear, we had long pants. We weren't expecting a lot of cold weather, but I brought just enough to support it. Shorts, socks, shoes, flip-flops, or Crocs. Other items for me, I have a Garmin watch, so I need, bringing the watch and bringing the charger for it. iPad, I had my own cable for it stashed away. Same thing with my phone. I brought my computer really just as a 500 gig or so backup, memory backup in case I needed to start getting stuff off of my memory cards and put them somewhere. So I made sure I had enough space for memory and stuff like that. So this was my personal items. Linda and Timmy had their own personal items that they put on here and kind of followed the same deal. Again, if you're going with a group and you've shared this with a lot of people, it really does help to have all of people's group items on here. Again, making sure they're not forgetting something. They can look at your ideas and go, oh, yeah, I definitely need that. Or, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. And they can kind of tailor things accordingly. So on this tab is the toolkit. In the group list over here, I did have a toolkit, see the page. So I just kind of output it over to this page here. I got a couple of ideas here. Toolkits can be pretty big. You're supporting a vehicle and a trailer and gear and everything else, and it's daunting the amount of stuff you want to take on with you on a trip. So I'll kind of go through it a little bit and talk about some specific things. Securing zip ties are they're a really important thing. Just have a few of them. Ratchet straps to tie down gear is obviously very, very important. Loctite thread locker, get a little jar of it and put in your kit. Basically, galvanized or baling wire is a really important thing to take with you. Screwdrivers, pretty much a no-brainer. Have the driver, have an extension for it. If you have specific items, specifically call them out. We have deep and shallow sockets for SAE and deep and shallow sockets for metric. Pliers, just holding things down. Some vice grips are really good, as well as just the regular channel locks and stuff like that. Get a good pair of cutters. Electrical is becoming more and more important. So have a digital multimeter, crimpers and strippers, jumper cables, make sure you got those, and electrical tape is really, really important. There's a bunch of other and specific things like a tire gauge jack, all that stuff. A shovel is really important. Air compressor, vehicle jack, tape measure, WD-40 pry bar. All this stuff is really important. So this is what I did for my camera kit, and your camera kit may vary. You may not even have a camera kit other than your phones. Your objectives are obviously up to you. So I got a container. I got the backpack and a drone bag for this. I've since updated the bag, and I will explain that in a little while. But I have like this Canon R5. I got a drone. I got a GoPro. I picked up another GoPro as well because this one is badly outdated. I got the lenses for my camera. Made sure I had enough memory for stuff. Made sure I had the adapter needed for transferring things to my computer and stuff like that. A couple of filters. Made sure I had batteries and chargers for all the devices I was taking. And I basically made sure I had the accessories, caps, cords, tripods, stuff like that, drone repair kit, cleaning, charging cable, things like that. We're kind of back to our trip planning flowchart here. We've finally done all this stuff. We've gotten ready for our trip. So we've basically defined our trip. We've defined the areas of the trip we need to support. I call them the functional areas. We've made our lists and we've gotten our training necessary to do all of this. We've then go through and make a final assessment. This is where everyone is looking at it, checking it out, making sure that we've addressed everything. You're going through the list back and forth. So this final assessment happens, and finally someone says, well, we're as ready as we're going to be. And then you go on your trip. And you have fun. You go see sights, and you say ooh, and then you say ah, and everyone has a great time. And eventually they all come home. It is really, really helpful to have a post-adventure assessment of everything. Ideally, it's with everyone, but it might just be with you. It might just be with your family, or it might just be with a select group of, quote unquote, mission leaders that are going to reassess everything. But this reassessment is important. It goes all the way back to here. What worked well? What didn't work well during all of this? And as an example, I'm going to talk about this photography one. We had a drone with us, and it was in its small little case that came with the drone and everything else. Getting the drone out of the case, taking off the little band that goes around it that hold the propellers in place, taking off the gimbal cover, and getting all the wings out and everything else, taking out the remote, putting the controller arms on the remote, mounting the phone to it, plugging it all in and everything. It's a lot of work. And then putting it away properly. You've got to put your stuff away properly on these trips or everything just kind of becomes a mess. It became really problematic to keep taking this drone in and out, and it got to the point where we're just like, it kind of became an aggravation. It kind of became a chore. So a reassessment occurred here. We went back and we looked at these areas, and I said to myself, you know what? I really need a way to reassess how I am bringing this drone around and what I'm doing on this with this drone. So I ended up looking at a Pelican case that I've got. I can cut something out on this and end up making it much more user friendly to get this drone in and out. It's a little bit bigger case, but I could support that, eliminating 90% of the work necessary to get this drone in the air. So I took a probably 8 or 10 minute job and dropped it down to a 1 minute job doing all of this. So a lot of that reassessment and stuff is important. How did all of your gear work? How did things serve people? And what improvements can I make within the dollar amounts that I'm willing to make? Reassess all of this stuff, find out what works and what doesn't. That is how I plan a trip. Again, I know it's really long. I know it's really academic. You may or may not need to go through all of it like this, but it does work. I recommend trying it at least once and seeing if it's right for you. I'll have a link to a bare version of this on the information below. So you can get it, you can save it for yourself, and try to implement it and see how well you like it. Thanks for this. Thanks for staying tuned through all of this. I know it was long. I hope it was really, really helpful.